What's up, guys? We are back. Fitness Profit Multiplier, Anthony and Jimmy. Today, we're going to be talking about sales calls and what never to do on a sales call. You ever been on a sales call and you're like, ooh, I probably shouldn't have said that. Those things happen sometimes where you're talking to somebody and you're like, probably shouldn't have said that. Mistakes come up. So this is why we recommend everybody to listen to their sales calls and go in and, constantly be engaging and looking and listening and making that better and better and better. But we're going to talk about one specific thing, what never to do on a sales call. There's probably a couple things never to do, but there's one thing in particular that we hear gym owners do all the time. So let's just get right into it, Jimmy. Sales calls. What do you think, man? What's your biggest pet peeve when it comes to listening to other gym owners' sales calls?
Well, one is that they're way too short, right? That's not really the one thing not to do, but we have a rule at our facility that if a sales call is less than 10 minutes, it was not a good sales call, right?
Yeah, that's a good one.
It's just the way that it is. So when I hear sales calls, we review them and they're less than 10 minutes. And this is a appointment booking call, but an appointment booking call is not just, hey, we have personal training. You signed up online. When you want to come in? That's not it, right? And so many people just want to rush past certain things and rush past the qualifying questions and that kind of thing. And as much as there's qualifying questions on your call, it's not pre-qualifying in the sense of a lot of these online trainers that'll say, oh, well, you want to pre-qualify them on this, that, and the other thing. It's more like creating excitement about the program and about the meeting and getting them to the point where you're kind of calling them out on their bullshit a little bit, but also giving them the opportunity to change, right? Like that's what the goal of the call is. But the number one thing, pet peeve for me, is this calls being too short. And like when I listen to calls and they're freaking 2 to 5 minutes long, and you ask you've asked this prospect 2 questions, and then you go, oh, I think you'll be a really good fit for our program. It's like you talk to them for less than 2 minutes. Like you need to give them a little bit of something so that they actually you actually know something about them, right?
I know this episode is about what never to do on a sales call, but just piggybacking off what you just said, this is what you should always do on a sales call, is you have to create that value and you have to kind of build that value up in that call and create the divide from what they want to the value that you're going to give them. So for example, if Mrs. Jones, who is my famous example, Mrs. Jones wants to lose weight, okay? The goal is not just the weight loss that she wants. There's a reason why she wants to lose the weight. So Mrs. Jones, well, okay, why do you want to lose 30 pounds? Well, I want to fit back into my clothes. Why is that so important to you? Well, I want to look better because blah, blah, blah. And you get to keep talking and keep asking the why questions. And then you end up uncovering, well, it's because I want to, have more energy for my kids. So now that's the value. So now everything that she says, you have to kind of work toward building that value for her. Well, our program is, our sessions are only 30 minutes, so you're going to be able to get back to the kids. You have to, everything that you say has to tie back to her goal, whatever it is. So that's one of the things you always should do on a sales call, is create that value on that call for them.
But the problem that we run into with that is you have to strike this balance between creating value for that prospect and sharing too much about your program. And that's what we're getting into today. A lot of people will talk about what certification they have and the fact that they use, kettlebell training, or the fact that they use certain training methodologies that they think are important in the grand scheme of how the process and the program works, but has nothing to do with what that prospect is feeling or how that prospect is going to actually end up working with you. So your prospect does not care if you're using kettlebell training, if you're a barbell facility, if you're they may care if you're HIIT or cardio based versus strength based a little bit, but they care about what's going to get them the result that they're looking for. So you cannot focus too much on your program, right? Even focusing too much on the scheduling software that you use or the policies that you have, or talking about how many people you train in a group or any of these kinds of things is too distracting from the actual goal of making this conversation emotionally relevant and motivating emotionally for this prospect. Because once you start to talk too much about some of the other aspects of your program, you'll start to lose them in the objections to even coming in for a meeting, because they're trying to disqualify your solution as one that would work for them, just as much as you're trying to emotionally drive them to make a buying decision, right? So these clients, these prospects are looking for reasons why it's not going to work for them. They're also looking for reasons why it will work, but they've been burned before from other programs. So they're like, well, if the schedule doesn't work for me, there's no way I'm going to go and I'm just going to waste money, right? Is what goes on in their head. So focusing too much on the schedule is difficult for them.
Yeah, and I'm going to give you guys a little bit of feedback on what we did. So one of the things, and Jimmy was talking about how, you talking about the little nuanced details. And listening to my sales calls from my team, sometimes I hear things like, oh, we have an app to schedule your calls and this and this. So every time I hear that, it drives me crazy because people don't want an app. They want a solution. So you saying as an app, I understand that it is valuable to have an app because it makes scheduling easier, but the way you're describing it to them, they don't want an app, they want flexibility. So we kind of came up with these kind of canned responses to the same questions that we always get. So I think it's a good one. So when people ask you what does the schedule look like, instead of saying, oh, well, you're going to get an app and you can schedule your own appointments, we just say something like, we have sessions starting at 6 a.m. all the way to 8 p.m. and we have a lot of flexibility. What days and times are you thinking about coming in? Because that's going to move the conversation forward. Because now they're going to talk about what days and times work for them. And then you could tell them, okay, perfect. We have those times open. This is going to work great. So having like this list of kind of canned responses when people ask questions that allow you to not dive into the details. So one of the questions we get all the time is, so how does it work? How does it work? So instead of saying, well, our program is based on strength training. You come in, we do a movement evaluation on you. We see how you move. Then from there, we give you a warm up and then we focus on strength training and barbell and squats and progressive, this, that, and the other thing. They're lost. So a simple answer that we've come up with. So how does it work? This is the answer. So we're going to go over this on the next step, because remember, when you're on the phone call, the goal is to sell them into an in-person meeting. That's why we're kind of laying that out there. So we're going to go over this on the next step, but a general overview is we will create your custom program based on your exact needs. We'll make sure you get into the gym a couple times a week, and we'll also meet regularly to make changes to your program to help you keep progressing. This is why all of our clients have such great results, because we stay on top of everything. So that's pretty much how it works. Can you see this working for you? And then some kind of like question to kind of keep the conversation going. But as you can see in that response, I didn't start talking about my programming. I didn't start talking about how they're going to get weighed every month or whatever other thing that you guys do. So that will keep the conversation moving forward. And it's not like you're not telling them that information, but at this stage in the process, that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, that's how all that works. So you have to come up with different ways to talk about and close those concerns for people in a way that is both vague enough but explanatory enough to satisfy their curiosity, right? So that's where the art of crafting what your responses are going to be comes into play. So you can't just pawn it off on the next step, right? Because if all you did was somebody said, well, how does it work? And you just say, well, we take care of that on the next step. We take care of that in the meeting. And you say that multiple times, they're going to think you're shining them on. They're going to get pissed off and they're not going to show up, or they're not going to schedule, right? So you have to think about it from a perspective of you being the prospect as well, because if you were a prospect trying to figure out more about whatever it may be, right? And learn more about it. And somebody kept having questions and you just kept saying, oh, that's for the meeting. We're not going to talk about that right now. It's like, we're not? Okay, I guess you don't want my business. Click, right? So it has to be this, on the next step, we'll go over this in more detail, but in a snapshot, right? We keep you accountable through our expert coaching and all the results that we've gotten 1,200 people over the last 8 years, right? We, keep you accountable with our supportive community that's going to be there with you through and through to make sure that you actually show up to the gym, right? Like things like this that are vague enough, but motivational enough that you're not going to get caught in this rabbit hole of a prospect interviewing you on the call, because we don't want it to go either way. We don't want it to be you interviewing a prospect. We don't want prospect interviewing you. You want it to be a conversation that feels normal and natural with some questions, right? So the goal is not to interrogate each other. So when it gets set up to a point where a prospect is interrogating you or has started interrogating you, you have to work your way around and out of that so that you can actually survive and get them to the meeting. Because when we get to the point where they're like, yep, question, over and over and over and over again, you get caught up being an order taker and being basically like a prisoner of that conversation. And you have to work your way out of that. And the easiest way to work your way out of that is to give vague enough answers that are pre-formulated, that are also detailed enough to satisfy that client's curiosity, right? Which is an art.
Yeah, and one of the things too is people, when they're not sure of something, they just ask more questions because they don't know what else to say. So they just start asking random questions. So like, for example, if you mentioned that you have a scheduling app, well, yeah, you're going to get a scheduling app and that's how you're going to be able to book your appointments. That's going to lead them to ask more questions about the scheduling app. And that's not important in this context, because the context is, are you flexible enough to come in on our schedule? That's really the question. But now they're going to start asking questions about the app. Well, how does it work? How often do I have to cancel? And I'm not saying you shouldn't answer these questions, but on the sales call, the goal is to get them to come into the facility, not to be answering these questions. You could explain those answers at a later time when it's more valuable. But on a sales call, the goal of the sales call is to sell them to the appointment, not to sell them personal training. When most people think that when somebody calls them, they're going to sell them personal training. You're not selling them personal training. You're selling them into the next meeting. And it makes it a lot easier once you realize that. So like a question that we get all the time, what does a schedule look like? And I answered that one already. I'm sorry, kid. Like, how many times a week do I need to come in? That's the one we get all the time. And the answer that we come up with is, it really just depends on how fast you want to get your results. But on average, people usually come between 2 and 5 times a week. So I answered the question, but I kept it vague enough to leave it open to their interpretation of what that is, right? I didn't say people come in twice a week, because now, or 3 times a week, or 4 times a week. Because if I say a specific thing, you're giving the person the ability to say, oh, I can't make it in 3 times a week. Or, right, oh, I can't make it in 5 times a week. Oh, I only wanted to come once. So you give that range for them that's vague enough, but still answers the question and moves it forward.
Yeah. And, when you're in your sales meeting itself, you will say something more to the effect of, our most successful clients do this. I think this is the best option for you, right? You actually prescribe it at that moment, but they ask how many times a week and you say, we have a range of this. I don't know yet what's going to be best for you. That's what we take care of in the meeting, right? So admitting that you don't know yet on the sales call is pretty powerful, because like, I don't know yet. I don't know you, right? Like, I just talked to you on the phone for 10 minutes. Sometimes I joke, or I used to, at least when I was on calls, I used to joke with prospects and be like, I don't know yet from our, brief 10 minutes of knowing each other. I would kind of joke, be like, well, I've only known each other for like 10 minutes, so I don't actually know yet what's the best thing for you, but we got to get you in the gym, right? So I can actually meet you and see you and get to know you a little better, right? Just mention the fact that like, oh, they already, and it's funny because they already feel comfortable with you if you do it right after talking to them for 10 minutes. And then you say something like, yeah, I've only known you for 10 minutes, so I don't really know yet. Like, oh, that's true. Oh, okay, yeah, okay, I'll come in, kind of a thing. So
I used to do the same thing. I used to tell them because I used to watch the clock. So how I usually take my sales calls is I hold my phone out like this. I have it on speaker and I have them on mute. And I'm watching the time because again, I like Jimmy said, I want to make sure I'm building enough rapport. And typically on the sales call, anywhere between 10 and 15 minutes is ideal. Anything less than that, it's not enough time to build enough rapport. So I used to say the same kind of line. I used to say, well, I've learned so much about you during these, 12 minutes that we've been on the phone. But and it works like gangbusters. It's a really cool line. I don't know why that works, but I guess like when you hear them say that, they're like, yeah, that makes sense. When I come in, we'll talk more.
Right.
Because it just makes sense. It's logical.
Because they think that it's going to be this quick thing where they can disqualify your program by talking to you for 10 minutes because they're like investigating what's going on with you, right? Oh, well, they're too expensive, or their schedule's not going to work for me, or they're too far away, or whatever it may be, or they do this kind of training, which I don't like, or they're going to make me eat broccoli, which I don't like, right? And it's like, all these things are ways that they can disqualify your program because it's not going to be something that they like. But if you're participating in a fitness program and you're a client who needs somebody to keep them accountable, fitness wise, you probably aren't going to like some of the things that the coach is telling you to do anyway. So exposing those things on the phone is not the way to be successful, right? You don't want to expose the things that they don't like about fitness in general on the phone. They want it to be as simple and as easy as possible. I mean, let's be honest. If your prospect, if something came out from like an actual pill that didn't cause gastrointestinal distress, like all these fat loss pills that have come out, wasn't a tapeworm that you were just ingesting, or wasn't some dangerous thermogenic that actually helped you lose body fat, we would all be out of business because people want it to be simple, easy, and seamless. But giving them reasons that it's not simple, easy, and seamless on the phone call prevents them from coming into the gym in the first place. So we have to get rid of those things on the call and not mention them or talk about them and make everything seem easy and normal. And then once you get them across the buying line, you can explain in the meeting itself, once they're in the gym or on, Zoom or however you do your meetings. Once they're in the gym meeting with you, then once they're across the buying line, you can bring up the things that they may not like, right? This is our cancellation policy. This is our no-show policy for sessions. This is how you book, once they're across the buying line. Because once they've seen the value and they're across the buying line, they're more receptive to things that may be a little bit friction, right, in that process.
Yeah, for me, when I first started too, I was always trying to educate people on the phone as to why what they were doing wasn't working and why our method is going to be better for them. But the problem is at that stage, they're not ready to listen and take that advice. They haven't paid for it yet. They're not ready for that advice. They just want to see if it's something for them. So that's why giving those types of answers, and like we talked about, more of like general information as opposed to specific information, is going to go a long way in getting more appointments booked, which will lead to more sales and essentially more profit in your pocket. So what never to do on a sales call is give out too much of the details, because at that point, it doesn't matter. All that matters is getting them to the next step, which is the consultation. So hopefully you guys learned from this one. And if you guys click those links below, you could join our Facebook group where we have other gym owners just like you, and keep the discussion going in there. But until next time, Anthony and Jimmy, Fitness Profit Multiplier, we are out.